Great. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Um, so today we'll talk about self-service Power BI and what are some tips, best practices, and I'm going to demo a couple scenarios which we can see how Power BI empowers both creators and consumers of reporting to carry out self-service. So I think a good place to start is defining what is self-service. Uh, Gartner's glossary defines self-service as end users designing and deploying their own reports and analyses within an approved and supported architecture and tools portfolio. So I actually really like this definition because it addresses a common misconception about self-service. Some people think that self-service is just do whatever you want or anything goes. And that's not the case. You need an approved and supported architecture and a set of tools. That way, when you do self-service, it's productive, it's reliable, it's trustworthy, but also has all the flexibility that comes with just the philosophy itself. So Microsoft actually identifies several self-service scenarios. So these strategies help define these different self-service environments. So I'm going to go over these, but really focus on that last one there on the screen, the managed self-service BI. But the two other ones are the business-led self-service BI and enterprise self-service BI strategies. And those are kind of the two opposite ends of the spectrum. So business-led self-service BI is when both data and content creation is decentralized. So that's really more of a bottom-up strategy to self-service and environment structure. And then you have enterprise self-service, in which all content is owned and maintained by a centralized team. So those are two extremes. Either it's completely centralized or completely decentralized. But there's a sweet, cozy spot in the managed self-service. So that's where your data is centralized and it's owned by a team of engineers or data architects, and the business users take control of the reporting, right? So data is centralized, but reporting is decentralized. And that falls into that philosophy of discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge that Microsoft likes to talk about. So what we're going to do some scenarios later on, and we're going to demo more like a managed self-service BI. And the thing is, like, not every scenario perfectly fits into these three buckets, right? You may have a situation that's is maybe on the more centralized side of managed self-service, where you still have a core BI team that, say, creates initial sets of reports and then hands off those reports to users. So not all report creation is decentralized. That's kind of the scenario I'm at right now with current client. So we have a central BI team that does the data architecture work, and we create initial sets of reports and dashboards, but we eventually hand those over to the users, and then they do continual iterations, and we try to build those reports out so they can use them as templates for future reporting that they can be in charge of. So with business-led self-service, that's suitable when decentralized data aligns with company culture and that data exploration is a high priority. The thing is, you need skilled people, and you also have to have a high priority on flexibility and rapid reaction. So you're looking at agile environments in this situation. But like I said earlier, it's not a free-for-all. You still need guidelines in place. You'll need to have proper training and data technique guidance, such as promoting shared data sets, best practices to reduce duplication. you'll want to encourage documentation, right? You want to avoid tribal knowledge and silos. That can happen often with these more decentralized environments. You have departments kind of going their own way and then applying business rules the way they would like things to be, whereas maybe accounting or finance might do it differently, and then there's disagreements on that. So you'll want to have some kind of documentation, some way of keeping track of those business rules that are applied to data and reporting. You can do that with like FAQ pages on a BI report and such. You can also take advantage of the promoted endorsements feature with data sets or data flows. So that's important because it allows you to promote data sets that can be shared with other groups and helps that be discoverable within the Power BI service. And I'll show some of that off in a bit. There's also another kind of endorsement called the certified endorsement, but that's more when you're talking about enterprise BI and when that's handled by a centralized team of experts. And I'll show the difference between that later as well. So enterprise BI works best in an environment where centralized content management is part of the data culture at the company. This is probably most applicable where you have highly sensitive data or you're subject to regulatory requirements. Your organization has the BI expertise to manage all the BI items end to end. So they have experienced BI engineers, report creators, and all that. And the content needs of the consumers also need to be well defined. So you need to have a robust requirements gathering process. So there's little need for customization or data exploration beyond what the reporting solutions that are delivered, right? So, and also content ownership and direct access to data is limited to a small number of people. So this is more like a waterfall situation, right? So you have reports that are clearly defined, everything has been signed off on, and then you won't before they even go into development. I actually worked with a financial services client recently where this was the case. We maintained all the data. We only gave users access to specific pieces of the requested data, and all report creation requests had to be highly documented and designed before they were going into development. And then once we did deploy them, they went through rigorous UAT. So yeah, that's more like enterprise BI. And then we have managed self-service, and this is more of a balanced scenario. And this works well when centralized data aligns with the company culture, but you also have a team of BI engineers within departments who can, well, not BI engineers, but BI report creators within departments that can do the decentralized report creation, right? So there's also value in reuse of data across the organization. And there's a need for self-service report creators to produce their own content. So you have that discipline at the core, right? The data and the flexibility at the edge with the report creation. And some guidance here is you want to train users to create separate data models and report develop, and you want to separate models and report development, right? You want to create a live connection between your reports and your data sets so that you can reuse data sets. You can use data flows to share commonly used data tables. You can use composite models to augment existing databases, and that's a preview feature, and we'll demo that later too. It's a really neat way of having centralized data, but being able to add referential departmental data. And here you can actually take advantage of certified endorsements for data sets to help identify verified data. But there's it's a more involved process to use a certified endorsement. It needs to cross a higher threshold than just a promoted endorsement, and so we'll talk about that and how we can implement that kind of tool. So I like to think of self-service kind of split up between data self-service and report self-service. So data self-service, you're kind of setting up your models and creating an environment within the data that encourages users to explore and encourages users to be comfortable with the data that's out there in your data sets or within the data set itself, within the tables and the fields and the measures. So some techniques and tools for that enable data level self-service would be creating shared data sets, right? Making sure that you have centralized promoted data sets that provide trust in a single set of single source of truth. And then you could use composite models. That way you can have that flexibility at the edge, what we just talked about. You know, data flows are a great way of creating reusable data tables that can be refreshed separately from the data set. And data flows can also be used across Power Platforms. They can be used outside of Power BI if necessary. And then we got Data Marts. So this is the latest addition to Power BI. This was just announced this year. And this allows the creation of a fully managed database created by the business users. And, you know, why did I include Data Marts as part of this whole self-service presentation? Well, I mean, it's really pushing that philosophy that Microsoft is moving forward with, is enabling and empowering business users to do more themselves. I wouldn't say taking away, but sharing some of that role with IT, what was traditionally IT, you know, standing up, say, a SQL server. Now with Data Marts, a business user can take their departmental data and deploy a fully managed SQL server and data set and do everything from Power Query to data modeling, all within the Power BI service. So it's really just going along with the self-service philosophy and mindset. And we'll definitely talk about that, preview that later. And that's new. It's a preview feature, so this is not going to be a training on Data Marts. I want to emphasize that you know, it's still being fleshed out and worked on. So we'll see it in action and see what we can do with it. But definitely, I encourage everyone to look into it as development goes on with Data Marts. And then we have tools for report self-service. So you know, this is pretty related because it's still within Power BI, but I think of this as ways of when you're building your reports, building in features and behaviors within the report that allow content creators and content consumers to encourage them to reuse reports, encourage sharing and customization. And you try to anticipate different report requests and report needs. In some ways you can do that are with dynamic filters. You can which allows for measure switching and customization within a report. You can use field parameters, which allow you to reuse visualizations across multiple fields. And this is also a preview feature. So this is also new, and you'll need to enable that, and we'll talk about that. And then you could also use bookmarks. So it's kind of similar to field parameters. It allows you to change report design. You can anticipate reports, variations, and provide flexibility to content consumers. And another thing is you want to make sure you have an organized model. That way it encourages users to explore, to reuse reports, and to do their own ad hoc analysis. So I wanted to keep the slide portion of this presentation kind of short because I really want to lean on the techniques and showing some of the stuff off in Power BI. So I'm going to move over to Power BI in a second, but let's talk about a certain scenario that might come up. Let's say we have a new report request. Say I'm a BI developer working with a business user, and that the business user requested a standard sales report, but they weren't exactly sure what kind of fields and measures they wanted to see on the report. And this often happens when you have somebody fresh and new to BI. They'll just say, hey, can you come up with something and we can work with it. So let's see what I can come up with as a first pass on that kind of report. Okay, so here's Power BI, and I did some preparation on this. So I put together this pretty standard sales report here. You see we have a variety of measures. Well, actually, we only have one measure here, sales. We have a variety of visuals. We have sales by color, sales by channel, sales by category and trend. So this is, let's say that the user said, okay, this is good, but I want the same kind of report, but I also want to see it by units, and not just sales. I want to switch between units and sales, and maybe I don't want to see category, or I don't want to see, I want to see something else. I want to see models, say, or subcategory, or instead of channel, I want to see region. But the same report. So they want, I've seen this so many times where you have reports that are exactly the same, but just variations on the fields that are used on the report, right? And it's just this redundancy and report creation, and people just churning out reports that look exactly the same, and then and they're not sharing data sets, right? And they're they each have their own data sets, and so somebody's creating their own measure or redefining fields or things like that, and so things start to get disconnected. So one of the things that we might want to put in place here is a shared data set. So we'll see what we can do with that. Let me pull up my second pass on this report here. Okay. So I have a colleague at DesignMind, and Amy Spracklin, and she actually defined Power BI as she describes Power BI. She describes self-service as not having to create a new report for every question asked. So I really like that idea. That way, you're empowering users to use the functions of Power BI to customize a view of the data that they're looking at, and but also feel comfortable enough with the data to create their own reports. So what we'll do here is actually, I'm going to go take it a step back. Before we even talk about the reporting functionality, let's talk a little bit about what's going on here in the fields. So you see here, I've actually organized my field panel here, and I've got these folders, right? So I have everything organized under fields or measures. And let me take a look at the modeling panel here. And so, I've been on many Power BI projects, and this is actually a very small data set. I've seen data sets that have dozens and dozens and dozens of fields, and it can be very daunting and intimidating for a user. They'll expand the fields panel and they can't find brand, or they can't find state or the customer state or anything like that. So they just give up on looking for data on their own. They'll just come back to the content producer or developer and just say, hey, can you just change this from brand to varietal, or can you just change this from region to state? and they may not even need it for the organization. This may not be an organizational reporting need. This just might be something that they want to see themselves. And it wasn't built into the report. And they're just too intimidated by the field panel to do it themselves. So I think it's a very understated technique to organize your field panel. And it's more of a science, more of an art than a science, really. There's some things that we can do. For example, let's expand the sales table here. So you notice that we've got keys, right? And this is a very common scenario, right? You have fields that are built into your model that don't have reporting functionality. They only exist to facilitate, like, say, relationship management, or maybe referential data, or kind of sorting, apply sorting to measures and things like that, or to fields. So they're not things that the user will need to create visuals. So we hide those, and then we can put those, say, keys in a key display folder. So here's the thing. In order to add things into folders, you select the fields. So I can group these, and then you can enter the display folder that you want in the properties panel here. So you see here I have it set to keys, and these other ones, say these here, have these, and these belong to the fields display folder. Just being a Windows user, maybe you might be tempted to right click and create folder or something like that. That's not going to work. You need to select your fields and then enter the display folder value there. But let's look at our customer table here. So we have fields, and then we've got customer and location. So this is interesting, right? And this is like a subfolder. So how do we do that? Let me select these two here. And the way you build that out is by using kind of a path in the display folder property here. So you have see fields and \customer, and that creates that fields customer subfolder hierarchy. And you can put those fields in there. Okay, so folder organization, hiding any support fields, that's important. And also I wanted to show this here. You see we've got, go here, tuck these away. Under sales, you see we have, say, something like sales amount, and we can use that. Let me pull my other version of this report here, show that here. If we look at this, say, this visualization here, see here, I just drop, you could just drop one of these field, like data fields, into the y-axis there, and it'll do a sum, but maybe, or it might do a count, or it might do an average. And this is what would be called an implicit measure, right? So you're taking a field and you're dropping it, and it's creating some kind of aggregation on it, but it's unclear, right? This could be sum on this visual, it could be average on a different visual. So it leads to kind of ambiguity. So the better approach would be to use an explicit measure. So see, I have this total sales measure here, and all it is just a sum on sales amount. You can be more complicated than that, but it's pretty straightforward. The idea is when you are dropping in measures onto your visualizations, you'll want to use explicit measures, so that whenever you're dropping this into a report, it's always going to be a total on sales amount. It's always going to be a sum. And you can create a max on sales amount or an average on sales amount, or a count, or however you want, or whatever you want. But it's always explicitly defined and explicitly labeled in the data set. That way, when users are exploring, they know exactly what this measure does. Rather than having one of these fields where it can be one of half a dozen different functions based on the functionality. If you're an experienced enough user, you'll understand this, but you want to err on the side of being clear and well defined in your measures. So this was like I said, this was my first pass at it, but then let's look at this second pass that I had set up here. This was doing more of that kind of report self-service functionality. So I've got several things going on in here. So first of all, I have this report measure here. This is a report measure slicer. And this allows me to flip between sales and units. So remember that user said, okay, I wanted to say the same exact report, but instead of sales, I wanted to see it as units. Well, now you can have it both ways. And sure, you can build your measures to show them side by side and such, but this way you can easily flip between them. So I actually have, let me take a look here. So actually, I love to use tabular editor here. So just to show the DAX involved there. So it's this total selected is what I'm using here. Let's see here, visualizations, selected measure, and then so yeah, that's being driven by a selected measure table. So this was a table that I created with those two values, units and sales. And then I have in my visualizations, I have total selected is the measure that I'm bringing into my visualizations. And total selected looks at the selected value of that table driven by the slicer, and it displays one of two measures, either total sales or total order quantity based on either units or sales. So that allows the flipping around between these two. And also notice that the title of the visualization changed as well, right? So that went from units trend to sales trend. So how can we do that? I'm going to click on Format Visuals, go to General, go to Title here, and we can do a conditional formatting on the title itself. And so we're grabbing the field value of this trend title measure. And where is that? So that's going to be in, I have a report groups table, and I have a titles folder here, and I have a trend title measure. And it's, again, based on the selection there, it's going to display either sales trend or units trend. Now, there are different ways of doing that. You can concatenate strings and such. But just for the purposes of this here, I set it up that way. So this is a neat way, because otherwise, if you don't have the if you don't have this as a conditionally formatted title, it's just going to be something fixed. And in that case, if you don't want to go through the trouble of creating that kind of measure, that kind of dynamic measure, you'll want to give it like a generic, say, trend line title or something like that. That way, based on the selection, it doesn't really matter what you have there. And then maybe you'll want to have something else. You'll want some way of identifying what the visual is showing there. Actually, let me circle back a bit to here, because one thing that I had to do is set this as a shared data set, right? Because you can see here, if I go to the modeling panel and then I look at my tables, you'll see that these tables are in direct query storage mode rather than import. And well, and you may expect that it might be a live connection instead of direct query, but there's something else going on here that made it go to direct query. But I'll circle back to that. Say in this previous iteration of this, what you can do here, if you wanted to split your report and your model, it's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is, actually, let me expand that. What you can do is actually just delete your visualizations. And you can just save your PBIX file and give it a generic title, like something that identifies it as a master data set. So, this is AdventureWorks data, so I just called it AdventureWorks master there. And then I'm not going to override it because I already have one there. And then you can publish that data set out. Yeah, sure. Actually, no. You can publish that data set out to the service. And then what you'll do is, let's take a look at the service here. Once it's up on the service, whenever you publish it out, you have both the data set file and the report file. You can delete the report file from there. So when I had uploaded this, I had the two files. I just delete the report file, and then you just have the data set. And then when you create a new report, all you have to do is just do a get data and search for your data set. So I have a blank report here. I'll do get data, Power BI data sets. I'm signed into the service, and there's a bunch of data sets there. And here's the data set that I had created. And notice that I have this set up as promoted with the promoted endorsement. This makes it easy to stand out from everything else going on in the service there. You actually set that up within the settings. So here's the service again. I'll go into settings here. And then if you go down to endorsements and discovery, you can see that I set that data set to promoted. So this makes the data set stand out, and you can make it discoverable, so it can be discovered without having to, and they can request permissions to access that data if needed. And here's the certified option, but it's grayed out. This needs to be actually enabled within your tenant settings. In my environment here, it's not set up yet, but I actually do have a client environment where this was set up, and I just took a screenshot of that admin portal there. So it's in the tenant settings under admin portal. You'll see certification. I'll see that in that case it was enabled, but you want to provide a URL for a documentation page. So that's going to be important because a promoted data set is great. It identifies data that can be shared with other users and can be used for self-service. But a certified data set is a data set that has gone through rigorous UAT by the content owners, by the key business contacts, and you'll want a actual, maybe a SharePoint page or some kind of form where people can click on it to see who was the person that did the UAT, when did they sign off on it, and who's the contact person if there's issues with that data set, right? And so this URL would list every data set that's certified, when it was certified, who did the certification, who did the UAT, when did it pass UAT, and only a certain security group can actually apply that certification tag on content on the service. So it is a very high threshold, and it should be. This is data that's trusted. It's trusted by and verified by the business. So and there's a higher level of accountability for that there. So that's why you actually want that documentation page. But in our case, we didn't have that set up. That's okay. Go back here. Let's look at our situation with this. So circle back. Okay, we created a report. We split out the data from the report. We put the report up on the service. We pulled it down and we started creating another variation of this report from that shared service. But then we wanted to take advantage of this new feature, the field parameters. So you can see what it does here is it allows you to select a value, and you'll see that this there's the visual updates based on that selection there. So now category, you've got, so we've got bike set up here. Let's clear that out. Right, so now you can select channel instead. So this allows, this one visual to function in different ways. And of course you can build hierarchies and drill down and drill up, right? That's a very common thing that you can do, but this allows you to say use a field from a product table and a field from the customer table. They don't have to have that relationship. They don't have to be a hierarchy. You can just change the field just altogether for that visualization. But what happens is when you do that, you need to have a local model. It does create like a fork from your main data set, and we can actually see it here. And it's actually a preview feature. So you'll need two options enabled. Let's go here to the options and settings and the options menu. Preview feature. So you'll need two things enabled for field parameters to work. You'll need the field parameters preview, and you'll need direct query for PBI datasets and AS if you have a shared dataset. So you need both of those enabled. If you're not using a shared dataset, if you're always just, for whatever reason, you're always using your own local dataset, you won't need a direct query. But in this case, we are. Actually, so let me actually do that. Let me just show that connecting to the Power BI dataset, pulling in my shared dataset, because I just want to show you what that looks like. All right, I have my dataset pulled down, and I'll go to modeling and say I want to create that field parameter, but I can't. See there, it's grayed out. So even though I have it turned on in my settings, I can't get to it because I'm on a shared data set. So what you'll have to do is you want to do transform data, and then it'll give you this direct query connection is required dialog. And then you'll add a local model there. So it'll connect to your data set there. And you'll say, you'll grab all your tables. It'll load it up through direct query. Okay, we're not going to build any queries here, so we're just going to apply and close Now, if you click on modeling, you'll see that we have new parameters turned on. See, this is grayed out initially, but now we have it. And you can do fields, and then do slice by, and then we can select the fields that we want to drive this. Say customer, say city, state, province, do product, and create. And there, now we've created the field parameter table. You'll see that down here. So you see the slice by table there, and you'll have the slice by field parameter slicer here. But let's actually see that in our actual report there. Here, slice by. And the thing is, if you go back into here, if you go back into, I couldn't find where you actually create, where you can edit an existing field parameter. But what you can do is just right from this, when you click on the slice by table, you can actually just edit the code here and say, let's say that I wanted to add another customer. Let's say I want to add postal code for some reason. Okay, do the good old copy paste there, put a comma there, change this to 6 for my sorting, and I'll change this to postal code, and this to match too. So now my slice by slicer has postal code. Maybe a different field would have been better, but the idea is now between this slice by slicer, the report measure slicer with a dynamic measure selection, and other standard slicers that you may have in your report, you've now created, you went from one version of this report to this combination of different report variations, right? You can have, you can add more slicers, and you can have more options to your slice by. And so you've created this situation where you've empowered the user to do a little bit more like this ad hoc analysis behavior, right? They can answer, they could answer their own questions. They could ask more questions, rather than having to go to the developer to create those variations. So the decomposition tree is actually a really handy measure, as a visual to use, because it gives you that kind of flexibility and customization. Well, it's a straightforward visual, but it allows users to say switch between bikes and components. And now let's look at brakes. Let's look at front brakes, and let's look at the silver color, right? So this allows them, and if they want to change it, they can easily just change the explain by fields there. If they have access to the data set, or if they're in the service, they can edit this, and then they can play with the visualization panel. So, of course, users who have the ability to edit reports, they can easily go to one of these visuals and drag and drop fields in it. But what if they only have access to the app, and the app doesn't have the ability to manipulate visualizations? So even then, even just app readers can have the ability to play with the reports and customize it. So you just kind of anticipate different scenarios, different situations with different kinds of users, right? So if those who have read-only access, well, they have one level of customization. Those who have maybe edit access and the ability to download the file and maybe make their changes and then re-upload it to their workspaces, they'll have that ability, and they'll be empowered to do so because they have a clean data set, a clean, organized set of fields, and they'll be comfortable with working with that data. Another way you can actually use field parameters is having multiple selections. So for example, here we've got a page that takes advantage of that and bookmarks. So we've got this as a matrix where you can click here and now it's a table. I get that question actually pretty often. They'll say, oh, can you give me this as both a matrix and a table or one or the other? Well, you can just easily have it flip between the two. And then with the field parameter, you can manipulate what gets actually populated into that table. So say you want to run this by country, region, and then by category, by customer. Okay, great, you could do it like that. Or clear that out and say, well, I'm just going to be interested in category, and then by category, state, province, and then by model, however you want, right? So different ways of slicing and dicing that data and empowering the user to do that kind of ad hoc analysis on their own, rather than, again, having to ask people to do it for them. Okay, so let's talk about another scenario here. No, but we talked about setting up reports for self-service. But what if you want to take advantage of some of that data self-service functionality, meaning that, let's say that you had a BI developer, he or she set up a set of reports and environment for us, and they're no longer there. They were maybe a consultant, and they've handed off to us. Or if I'm with a small department that we just spun up our own Power BI instance, and I'm somebody who's in charge of it all myself. So how do I take advantage of some of that data self-service functionality? So let's take a look at, say, a goals situation. So let's say I had some departmental goals. Let's say I have a master data set. I pulled that down, and my department came up with some goal numbers. Now they're not ready to deploy to the full organization yet, so I'm only going to pull it down for my own report, right? So what you can do is you can have that live connection to a data set, but then you'll click on the Excel workbook option, and again, if you have that direct query option enabled, it'll turn your live connection to a direct query connection and create that composite model situation. So I have my sheet here. Do transform data. So now I'm going to create a composite model, right? Using this data set that I've augmented the main data set to. I'm just going to cancel this actually. Because I already did that. So I actually already brought in the goals table there. And just get rid of that screen there to start that. So now, yes, I already brought in that goal. Let's see here. You see in this table, in this data view here, you'll notice that my customer table is over direct query, but my goals are imported, right? Straightforward, not a complicated set of goals, because it's something I came up with, or something me and some people on my team came up with, and we just wanted to experiment with that and put it up on a Power BI report. So there, I just dropped it into that. If we go into the visualizations panel, you'll see I have goals selected there. And that's doing a similar kind of situation there. It's looking at the report groups selected measure table, grabbing what's selected and displaying either unit goals or sales goals based on that. So that way I can flip between unit goals and sales goals. So that's great if we have so if it's something I'm working on solo, or just me and a few colleagues, but what if I wanted to share this outside of Power BI? Maybe we're experimenting with the Power Platform. Maybe there are other data sets out there that may want to implement these goals, or they want access to maybe add additional goals or additional granularity to the goal or something like that. So how do we put it up somewhere where more people have access to it? Well, we can set it up as a data flow. Okay, so here I have my PPU workspace here, and I've already built it out here. There's a goal data flow. Right, because I'm not trying to do a training on each one of these features, right? Because I could spend an hour just on data flows itself, or more time on just Power BI visualizations, right? Each of these little segments could be an hour in and of themselves. So really what I'm trying to do is give you all ideas of things that you can implement to create that mindset and philosophy of self-service, and empowering more people within the organization to answer their own questions and develop these things. So with all these things, you can always look up the documentation and go through the tutorials on this. But I just wanted to show here, we've got a goals data flow. And what I did was, as you can see over here, my source is just that Excel workbook. I pulled it in, I renamed my query to goals, and say if other people have access to this in the organization, maybe they can add to the goals, and then I can, what we end up doing here, I'll just close out of this. Oh, yeah, close Power Query. Pretty straightforward, not a complicated data flow. Data flows can get very complicated, but what you have here is a table, a goals table, and now I can import this table into my data set, into my composite model, or I can use this table in other data sets or outside of Power BI altogether. Yeah, it's a very flexible tool within the service. So now that I talked about data flows, I think that the logical next step is the Data Mart, right? Because that is there's a lot of buzz going around about Data Marts. It's the latest addition to Power BI. It's in preview mode. So let's go back to the data set. Oh, let's go back to the service that is. I got a few Data Marts here. I'll just click into this one that I have. So what is the Data Mart? So the Data Mart is literally a SQL database. It is a fully managed, fully functional relational database built into the Power BI service. And actually, maybe the best way of doing this is actually just by creating a new data mart. Let's just create add new data marts. And then what I'll do is I'll just use my Excel sheet and just show that how we can just create a brand new SQL database off of it. I'll just I'll upload a file here. Good old AdventureWorks. So while this is loading, yeah, so this is going to be a 100% web-based, no software required, no Power BI desktop required. It's often looked at in the same way as data flows because it gives you Power Query functionality. Let's see here. Click next. But it brings in, because with Power, with data flows, your data flow, your table is separate from your data set. With Data Marts, they're integrated. So now you've got Power Query, but you also have the ability to set up relationships, create measures, do row level security. So let me create that report there. Now create that data set, that is. Okay, and now I've got my data there. Hit save. All right, so now it's going to build the ETL process right there in the background. It's going to, if it finds relationships, it'll create them, and then it'll start loading in data. Something to keep in mind is that you need to have PPU or premium capacity. This is a premium feature. Okay, so now we can go to the workspace. Let's give us a minute there. Actually, another thing that you can do with Data Marts is access them through SQL directly, because it actually does stand up a server there in the background. No need to set up a resource group or set up analysis services instance and then create the server or anything like that. It's all done in the background, tied to your premium setup there. Okay, so you see here I've got my data coming in, and usually, in terms of Power Query, this is where it ends, right? You pulled in the data. If this is a data flow, this is kind of where it ends. Let me just set up my browser here. Let's see what you can do now is you can go in here and set up relationships. So you can set up your product relationship. So my product key will join to my product key, and you can set up your relationship there, so on and so forth. You can do all of that. I actually already did all of that in my data mart here. So let's just show that. So yeah, I already built up all my relationships there. Another neat thing is you could do row level security in here. So I already have a role for United States. You see here, the filter icon there tells me it's on sales territory. Country equals United States there. So I got my role, and I could assign somebody. I've got Amy set up in here. Sorry, no Europe for you, only you, United States. So you've got role level security, role level security built into Data Marts. And of course, you can build measures. I think I already built a couple here. Yeah, so I've got total sales amount there. If I want to build a new measure, I can build it in there. Let's do total units, sum, sale, now let's do sales amount. Just duplicate that. Let's do total sales amount. No, we already have it. That's fine. That's the idea. So you can create measures there, and then actually, let's take a look at this. You could actually run queries as well. So here's a query I just set up, very straightforward. Selecting category, fiscal year, summing on sales amount, from sales, joining on product key, and date on date order key, basic stuff. But now you can run that kind of SQL query against your data tables. And then you could also build visual queries here. All right, so here I have a sales to customer merge going on, and I have it set up as it's a left merge there. And then you can expand, you can select columns, remove columns, all of that good stuff. And if I go back into my workspace and I go into Data Marts and I go to settings. Now I'm not going to go into this because actually I've had some problems with this because this still preview is still early in preview and they're actively, I think there was an update somewhat recently on this too. This is actively being worked on, so just keep that in mind that this is not ready for production. But just the idea is if you go to server settings, you have a connection string, and you can use this connection string to connect to those views in SQL Management Studio. Just kind of whetting the appetite, just letting you know the kind of functionality that this is being worked on, and that's again, the philosophy with Data Marts is empowering the user to share some of that responsibility with the IT team. I'll say that this does not at all replace data warehousing, proper data warehousing. I think there's a 100 gigabyte limit with Data Marts. I think this is mainly built for departmental usage. So if your department wants to spin up a database and create this kind of situation, I think that's great for that. It also does not replace data flows. That's a very common question. How does this relate to data flows? Because of that Power Query functionality that it shares. But the idea is data flows still are its own thing. And if you have just a specific table that you want to reuse in other places, and you want to have it refreshed separately from the data set, that's what a data flow is great for. The Data Mart combines the data flow with the data set, so there's no need to refresh those separately. Those can be scheduled. You can have that scheduled refresh as one unit. So I think that's one of the benefits also of Data Marts, is that you can have that all within one space. So again, I actually highly recommend checking out the Microsoft documentation on introductions to Data Mart, and it just goes into detail of all the pros and cons, and I want to say pros and cons, but all the different features and the scenarios in which you want to use Data Marts, and just keep an eye on that space there as it gets updated. With that pretty much wraps up my presentation. That was a lot. We went everything. We went from just an empty workspace to creating reports and creating composite models and looking at data flows and data marts. So it's a lot. But the idea is the whole the whole concept is empowering self-service, empowering analysis, creating an environment where people are comfortable reusing reports and playing around with them, saving them, and just making people comfortable with the idea of taking advantage of all those features of Power BI. All right, thank you.
Good night, everyone. Yeah, thanks so much, Raul.
No problem. Good night, everyone.
Great presentation.
Thanks, Raul.